What's going on YouTube? It's Teej back again with another video, and today I'm giving you my grade for all 9 head coaching hires around the NFL, and hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you do, hit that like button, it would help me and my channel out a ton. If you're new to the channel and want to see more football content, just hit that big red subscribe button, and of course give me your grades of these head coaching hires down in the comment section. And I have this in my pseudo ranking. A lot of this can be interchangeable. You'll see some similar grades going around. Love to have your rankings if you have them, or you can just give me your grades down in the comments section. Let's have a fun football conversation, starting with Lovey Smith here. I give it a D+. I was thinking about putting a different, screen here on the start. I didn't want to give anything away, but it's one of those things where I think Lovey Smith and his family might be the only people excited about this hire. And I'm sorry, Houston fans. I'm pretty sure this is also a one-year deal. Like, this is pretty evident to be a space holder, essentially. Who knows about, Brian Flores might have been their guy. Then you have a lawsuit. Sounds like they really wanted Josh McCown to be the next head coach. Didn't get a lot of good buzz. He wasn't interested in an OC job, so feels like what Houston wanted just didn't come to light. And Lovey Smith is an opportunity to say, hey, you good culture guy, been around the league, been a head coach. You can be our head coach for a year. It's just kind of a stopgap move. But if you struggle at Illinois, it's going to be a tough time, having success at the NFL level in my eyes. Not really an inspiring move. Not even like a young guy who can grow into the job. At least McCown would be like, well, he's not necessarily qualified, but at least it's a young guy who could grow into that role. Lovey Smith, you know what you're getting, and it's just not going to be the guy who takes this team to a Super Bowl in 5-10 years or whatever that window might look like. So just an overall uninspired hire. The only reason it's a D+ is I do like the idea of bringing in Pep Hamilton. He was their QB coach last year. He was the OC in Indianapolis working with Andrew Luck. He was the QB coach Justin Herbert's rookie year. I was actually really hoping the Steelers might bring him in as a potential OC replacement for Matt Canada. Didn't happen. It's all good. Now he's the OC. Even though I did like Tim Kelly, I think, especially once he got more acclimated and familiar with Davis Mills, the offense started to open up. I think Pep Hamilton's probably a little bit better of a name in that position, and a guy who's has a good track record of working with young quarterbacks and getting the most out of them. And if you're a Texans fan, you'd love to see Davis Mills be the next of those guys. On to the New Orleans Saints. I don't think Dennis Allen's a bad hire, so C+ might be a little rude. B-, maybe just flatline B. It's just one of those things where you know what you're getting, right? And for New Orleans, and based off the situation, that's the best thing possible, right? This is a continuity hire through and through. Keep everything that's intact. I expect this team don't have a whole lot of cap room as of right now. Restructures, and they'll probably have enough to keep their guys in, maybe even including Jameis Winston in the mix. So we'll see. I think this is, keep the status quo. Dennis Allen knows that the system in place in that building. Pete Carmichael's still there as the OC. He's been there for almost a decade now. So some of the names in and around the building pretty much the exact same. So not a whole lot to say that it elevates the team, right? Like, a lot of times you look at these head coaching hires, especially the people high on my list or who I gave good grades to, I think they elevate the organization. Dennis Allen's just not being asked to do that, but it is a win in a lot of ways for New Orleans to keep that continuity, keep their goal in mind, and keep that regime and people in the same building. And on top of that, you keep Dennis Allen, who's proven to be one of the best defensive coaches in the NFL. Look at how much he's gotten out of that side of the football over the past, half decade that he's been there, and he's going to continue to call plays on that side. So that's a W in itself for New Orleans. Next up, we're going to have a cluster of B's and B+ coaches here. So this is pretty flexible and pretty fluid, but again, these are my pseudo rankings. Matt Eberflus, and it sucks that, he's 7 out of 9 here of my rankings. I think he's a good hire. And I think in a lot of ways he can be similar to what Brandon Staley was with the Chargers, right? You think of this young defensive coach who just gets it, right? And if you understand defense, you can help bring about a younger quarterback. That said, Brandon Staley legitimately was a college quarterback. Eberflus not quite the same background, but I think this is a guy who has proven, just knows how to lead a group of men, really got a whole lot out of that Colts unit, who you look at on paper, and there are some superstars, right? DeForest Buckner and, Kenny Moore is a stud, and Darius Leonard, of course. But it's not a defense that's, littered with talent at all positions. It's not like Tampa Bay, over the past couple of years, or Pittsburgh, or anything like that. But it's still maintained to be one of the better units. And I'm also intrigued by this hire because the Bears, outside of Jalen Johnson, don't have a whole lot of secondary talent. It's pretty much Jalen Johnson and Eddie Jackson. Eddie Jackson started to get up there in age, but even Eddie Jackson in and of himself You look at the safeties and the production that Eberflus got out of his guys in Indianapolis. What does that mean for Eddie Jackson? Hopefully good things if you're a Bears fan. And additionally, Jalen Johnson's probably better than any Colts corner that Eberflus had. And he's bringing over Alan Williams, who's going to be the DC in Chicago now, and he comes from Indy with Eberflus, so there's some good continuity there as well. But those two, it's interesting to see, like, Jalen Johnson is probably the best corner that either two of them had during this tenure with Indianapolis, now in Chicago. But they've done as good a job as any in the NFL at hiding the fact that there's not a whole lot of, talent in that position group. In Indianapolis, it was Kenny Moore. And the reason it's, I'm saying Jalen Johnson's probably the best corner, I'm going to walk that back here. Kenny Moore is a stud, and I don't want to take that for granted. But he operates out of the slot. So it's just different. Jalen Johnson's the best outside corner that either of these two guys have had. So, sorry, quick amendum there, but best outside corner that either of the two have had. But, of course, a lot of it comes down to, what are they doing with Justin Fields? What does this offense look like? They bring in the Packers QB coach. I'm trying to find the name next to me. Luke Getsy. That's an interesting hire. I'm intrigued to see what that means, right? And Getsy also even had a head coaching interview with the Broncos. So clearly it seems to be an around the league thing, that there's some good buzz around him. That said, I think part of the reason the Broncos interview him is try to get the good side of Aaron Rodgers, make that a more appealing destination. That said, now we have an opportunity to really see what he has as an offensive mind, as a play caller. If he can carry over any sort of semblance of that success that the Packers have had with Aaron Rodgers the last couple of years, you're feeling really good, because obviously Justin Fields is uber talented. The scheme works. This is a potential division up for grabs. You bring in a defensive mastermind. Maybe this is a quicker turnaround than I'm anticipating, but to me, this felt like you needed to go offensive-minded head coach, which is tough to do right after you went with, your offensive guru. So I was a little disappointed in that respect that it was Eberflus, but at the same time, it's about being a leader of men, setting a culture, and being a good decision maker in game. And I think Eberflus has checked a lot of those boxes as a DC in Indianapolis. Who's to say he can't do that as the head coach in Chicago? Next, Mike McDaniel. This is a tough one, too, because, obviously the Brian Flores situation, that's tricky. But Mike McDaniel's a hot name, especially those who are, big fans of analytics and using numbers to help break down the game. Mike McDaniel's one of your guys. And I also think the pairing of him and Tua is really enticing, right? If just looking at it from, the Shanahan tree perspective, obviously there's going to be its variations, but the ability to use playmakers in a yak perspective. It almost feels like Tua is like the tricked out version of Jimmy Garoppolo, right? Sometimes you go to a car dealership and you can just buy the car, or you can go get it, the subs, the nice interior design, the better seats, etc., etc. I'm not a big car guy, but kind of get what I'm talking about. Tua feels like the tricked out version of Jimmy G's, better mobility, the arm's probably about the same. They're both quick processors for the most part. They both also have an ability to just find a defender once or twice a game and you don't know what they're looking at. But Tua just feels like the newer and the more tricked out, again, I keep using that, version of Jimmy Garoppolo. So part of that, bringing over Mike McDaniel, is really interesting. But also this is a team that's obviously struggled running the football. What does this team do with the draft and free agency, right? They have a ton of cap space. Is Mike McDaniel, slamming on the table saying, I need Teron Armstead because, I had, Trent Williams, and that's what the offense, it's a big part of what its identity revolves around. I need Teron Armstead, and does Stephen Ross and company oblige to that? That's intriguing. So we'll see once we get through free agency, but what does this run game actually look like given this offensive line in front of, players like Duke Johnson, Savon Ahmed, or is there a, talent rejuvenation in both the offensive line and the backfield? We'll see. That's part of what I don't know what to expect with this hire. Where do the priorities fall with Mike McDaniel, Chris Greer, and in this group this offseason? But I'm interested to see what it is. And hey, young, up and coming, well-respected mind around the league. And, credit is hard to earn, especially among so many different people in the NFL, right? This is as polarized a time in, the world, point blank, leave it at that. But in the NFL, there's so many different ways of looking and analyzing the game. But if you have a guy who has near universal respect and positive things being said about him, that's a pretty solid hire in my eyes. Next up, Doug Peterson. This is one where I literally wrote down A- when I initially did it. We don't know the coordinators for Peterson yet, but if this hire was made in a routine fashion, right? Move on from Urban Meyer, season ends, 2 weeks later, Doug Peterson's announced as the head coach, and it was him and the 4 other candidates. It took time to deliberate, And then they said, you know what, Doug Peterson's our guy. He came in for a second interview, blah, blah, blah. This got so weird and wonky. It felt like, okay, well, this is Byron Leftwich's jobs now. Okay, well, now they're going to bring in Adrian Wilson to replace Trent Baalke. Baalke's trying to keep his job, so he's bringing in Vic Fangio and Rich Bisaccia. And what is this turned into? And now it looks like Rick Spielman might be coming into that front office in an elevated position over Trent Baalke, while Baalke keeps his job, I guess, to be a part of the building and show his face, I suppose. But if you were to just say, hey, Rick Spielman stepping in the front office and they hired Doug Peterson as his coach, I'd be like, wow, that's an absolute turnaround of an offseason there for the Jags. That is a step in the right direction and a way to bounce back from, Urban Meyer last year. But the process was really cluttered and ugly. That said, it's almost reminiscent to where, like, after the Raiders draft last year and Alex Leatherwood round 1, Trevon Moehrig in round 2, and it's like, well, if you flip those two, it looks better. This is a spot where it's like, if you just look at the hires, this is great. And we're just talking about head coaches here. Doug Peterson, awesome. As stable a head coaching, option there was this hiring cycle, this carousel, and especially coming off the heels of the Urban Meyer tenure, this is exactly what you're looking for. Plus, he's won a Super Bowl. He's worked with young quarterbacks, had Carson Wentz in the MVP conversation, just the MVP frontrunner prior to his injury. This is a slam dunk for Trevor Lawrence. But the process was so muddled and confusing and hard to keep up with in a lot of ways. So that does take it down half a letter grade, basically A- to B+, but still a big fan of Doug Peterson in Jacksonville. And then we got Kevin O'Connell. And I've been a big fan of Kevin O'Connell for a while, and part of it is, I live in the state of Virginia, so, Washington sports buzz is naturally something I hear a lot of. And when he was on the, then Washington Redskins staff, now the Washington Commanders, how about that? Interesting name. I think I've talked about it on the channel here. But that said, moving on past that tangent, he was a name that was getting hot, and I heard a lot of it here. And next thing you know, he goes out to be the OC in LA, and I'm like, okay, it's only a matter of time. And now that time has come to fruition. He is the next head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. Good, young offensive mind. He worked with Shanahan. He's worked with LaFleur. He's worked with McVay, obviously. So it's kind of nice. I don't expect the offense to be the exact same. And really, the scheme shouldn't be the end-all, be-all. Like, okay, well, now, Minnesota's going to look like the LA Rams. Therefore, they're going to the Super Bowl. Like, it's just not that cut and dry. But he's also one of those guys, just like Mike McDaniel. Nothing but good things have been coming out about him, and he seems like a sound decision maker. My only concern with him is how much of that carryover from Shanahan and McVay in the game manager sense carries over with O'Connell. Right? Both those guys, awesome, schematic minds, but they just find a way to butcher some of their uses of timeouts, how they challenge. Weird. It going for fourth downs, 2-point conversion attempts, wins right, wins wrong. Hopefully Kevin O'Connell, especially with, Queasy, very analytically driven GM, maybe there's someone who's in the ear of O'Connell saying, hey, analytics say this is a good spot to go for it, or hey, let's bring out the punt, this is a better spot to, punt it away. And if so, and O'Connell's listened to that, I think that alleviates some of those concerns. But hey, I think this is a really exciting offense, and it's really interesting to see how this changes the offensive approach for Minnesota, right? The team that's used a lot of 2 receivers, 2 tight end sets, almost always in single back as is, so not a whole lot you have to change there. And also the familiar with O'Connell and Kirk Cousins, spent a year together in Washington when O'Connell was the QB coach. That's fun if they hold on to Cousins. But back to my original point, does this team prioritize finding a third wide receiver? Do you bring back Dede Westbrook? Do you draft a guy in the mid-rounds? Because, obviously with the Rams, a lot of 3 receiver sets, right? So who's that third guy for Minnesota, or do you need to add a fourth, right? Do you think KJ Osborne can be that third, but then you need a fourth guy to bring in because, Thielen could get hurt. Osborne, unknown commodity for, for the most part. So interested to see how that changes the complexion of this team, but good young guy, kind of fits with what this direction seemingly is moving forward for the Vikings. And plus, if he brings a similar-ish offense to the Rams, given their, Kirk Cousins, Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, like that alone makes me pretty excited. Also sounds like they're going to move to a 3-4 on defense. Intrigued. This team needs pass rush. If they keep Danielle Hunter, is he moving to an outside linebacker role? Just fascinated by how all that kind of comes together. I'm pretty sure this is the last B+. I have Nathaniel Hackett. This is largely because this feels like a play to try to get Aaron Rodgers to say, yep, that's where I want to go next year. And even if it doesn't work, it's hard to look at someone's previous work in a different city with a different quarterback and a different regime all around him. But the fact, Blake Bortles, and it wasn't good. but you were getting production out of him that really Jacksonville and Nathaniel Hackett had no business getting out of a guy as bad as Blake Bortles, right? That's really intriguing if this team doesn't land Rodgers and Hackett becomes the guy who has to groom a Matt Corral, a Malik Willis, a Sam Howell, whoever they take at 9. That's a really fascinating situation where it's like, this guy might be the best option and the most appealing name to bring in to try to allure Aaron Rodgers over, but he might also be one of the better, potential head coaches at grooming young quarterbacks. I mean, got a lot out of Blake Bortles that didn't really have any business getting out of him. Aaron Rodgers, back-to-back MVPs after, looking like he was about to muster through the end of his career or potentially get traded. Green Bay drafts Jordan Love. Obviously, that's his own controversy in its own right, but it's interesting to see Hackett's gotten a lot of success out of different levels of quarterback, and it's, how do you apply that to Denver? That said, the quarterback position is the biggest thing here, so that's all I was really looking for this hire. And they went Dan Quinn because he's a good, decision maker, leader of men. He's been to a Super Bowl. I would get that, but this was, I think, a hire that basically said, hey, this is a good roster. Sure, we could use some depth, could use a right tackle, need a new starting edge with Von Miller obviously gone, but the quarterback position is the end-all be-all focus of this offseason. Nathaniel Hackett, we feel like that's a guy who helps make it more interesting for Rodgers, or could be a potential guy to groom one of the rookie quarterbacks we could bring in. So overall, I think this was the right focus and direction for the team to move in, and he was one of the better options either way. You want to go veteran or you want to go young? I think Hack can get the most out of either of those two potential paths they take. And I was correct. We are on to the A's, starting with A- Brian Dabal. This, plus the fact they brought in Wink Martindale as their DC, I am over the moon, and I'm especially the more I think about Wink Martindale running that defense, I am really thinking about making this my number 1, but it comes in at number 2. Dabal worked wonders with Josh Allen. Like, I don't have to repeat any of the rhetoric that you've already heard plenty, right? He took a project quarterback, and now Allen is in one of, if not the highest side of his potential variance as a draft prospect. Like, this is towards the top of what he could have been. And a lot of credit has to go to Dabal. And even this past year, they started to get more and more efficient at running the football, both with Devin Singletary, but also obviously using Josh Allen as a running threat. So one of the big criticisms against him, Dabal had a counter to it and showed some growth there. Now he goes to New York, and I think this is going to end up being a career year for Daniel Jones. One, because the focus is going to be on the trenches, and that unit's going to get better. Ideally, Kenny Golladay can stay healthy, Kadarius Toney as well, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton. Whoever is at wide receiver on this team's roster, if they're healthy, better offensive line, how could it not be from year start to year end a better year for Daniel Jones? I have a hard time seeing it not be, especially when you talk about Brian Dabal and his ability to work with quarterbacks, his offensive scheme, and similar skill sets. And Daniel Jones is in a lot of ways the poor man's Josh Allen, really mobile, tall stature. You have some turnover concerns with Jones. It feels like it's one decision making, 2 fumble issues. With Allen, sometimes he just has these games where he chucks 4 picks to the other team and you don't really know why. But I think there's something to work with there. And then on top of that, I know we're talking head coaching hires, but to bring in Wink Martindale, who literally had previously been a head coaching candidate with this team, I mean, that's a slam dunk to me. And you look at this defense, I think it's in a spot where Wink Martindale is one of the best DCs they could have hired. They have the corners to fit that defensive scheme, and Azeez Ojulari, obviously a pretty good pass rusher, but I look at a guy like Lorenzo Carter, right? This pretty much he's a speed rusher when he does rush the quarterback, but he has so much gifted athletic ability, and he is good and fluid moving through space. We haven't gotten to see him play a whole lot in zone, but in Wink Martindale's scheme, where so many of those outside linebackers have to have the ability and skill set to drop back into zone coverage, I feel like Lorenzo Carter is going to give this team, a pretty quick plug-and-play player in that role. So really excited to see what that turns into. But again, back to the actual head coaching hire. Dabal, they needed an offensive guy to try to either groom Jones or potentially, be the main voice at when they find who the next quarterback is. Or maybe it's not Daniel Jones. Maybe this team does get uber aggressive and land of Russell Wilson. Wilson with Dabal, sign me up for that if that is the route they decide to take. And my number 1 hire is Josh Mcdaniels. And this one and Dabal, neck and neck. And part of it is because of the DCs, right? Dabal brings in Wink Martindale. McDaniels brings in Patrick Graham, former Giants DC, funny enough. I think when you have a well-rounded staff, and part of the reason this video is coming out late is because I wanted to find out more of the coordinator hires and talk about that a little bit, because it's a team effort, it's a coaching staff effort as well. For McDaniels, I think this is a push to where they're going to try to go in with Derek Carr, but both McDaniels and O'Connell, I think they shouldn't be rushed into that decision. Use this year as an opportunity to see, hey, how close are we actually with what I want to do and this quarterback being the center of it? And if it's, like, hey, okay, the quicker path to our Super Bowl is by blowing it up, then you do that after this year. But we'll see. But McDaniels, this guy who, this job caught his eye. He's had plenty of head coaching opportunities, obviously took the Indy job, then decides not to take it, So something about this Raiders job made him, one, want to take it, and two, stick with it. So that's really interesting. And then there's some offensive pieces that I think make a lot of sense for what he could potentially do. It starts by having a solid top-end quarterback. Now, not elite, but pretty darn good one in Derek Carr. And he had a top 10 type of season at the position this past year. Josh Jacobs is a solid running back, and Darren Waller's a mismatch at anywhere you put him on the field as a tight end or a wide receiver. Hunter Renfrow, one of the best slot guys in the league. You add a potential downfield burner, maybe even a possession guy, depending on what you want to do draft free agency and where your priorities lie and who might be available. It feels like a really complete offense. Do you also need to patch up that offensive line? Specifically, if you find a right tackle, kick Leatherwood in permanently to right guard, I think you'll start to see some better progress and better play out of that unit. And then for Patrick Graham, he's one of the best DCs in football right now. And this team's defense took a huge step forward playing with Gus Bradley and a defensive philosophy and a scheme that is starting to become outdated. Patrick Graham has a way of elevating the play out of so many of his guys. We saw the Giants when they were really, playing to their full strength, one of the best units in the NFL on that side of the football. So that on top of, I think Unique Ngakoue, really solid 3-4 outside linebacker. Max Crosby, maybe he's a 3-4 DN, maybe he's an outside linebacker, stand-up rusher. I think there's some flexibility to be had there. And on top of that, love to see what they do with the secondary and the safety position. I think that is a big part of the missing long-term projection with this team, both on its roster, but also how does it fit with Patrick Graham? That's my only concern. Otherwise, this might have ended up being an A+, because I do like both the names, head coach, and I presume McDaniels is going to continue to call plays, and then Patrick Graham on the defensive side, and just going to a team that needed a win in the right spot. I think the Raiders got one. But those are just my grades and pseudo ranking of the head coaching hires. Tell me what you think down in the comment section. What hires did you love? What was your favorite? Which ones are you scratching your head about? Which one do you maybe dislike the most? Hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, hit that like button. It would help me and my channel out a ton. If you're new to the channel and want to see more football content, be sure to hit that big red subscribe button. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I'm signing off.